Good evening, Aventura, Florida. Kahal Kadosh, I'd like to start with an outlandish statement. I'm not a big Zoom class believer. I'm the guy that needs to stand in front of people, look at them, feel them, pick up the vibe, and reach before I teach so that we can get into some sort of a very warm relationship through the words. But I'll tell you the truth. Tonight you got me on a weakness, and that weakness is your rabbi. My love for this Rabbi Galamidi is something fantastic. The respect that I have for him, I don't look at him just as a rabbi in the community. To me, this is a family member. I trust him. I trust him with my life. And with that, Hashem has given me the opportunity to be lucky enough to be connected with people like your rabbi. And that's why when he called on me tonight, I was more than honored to say yes, even though I really wanted to say no. But Rabotai, we got work to do. And once we're talking outlandish, and once we're talking about great rabbis, did you hear this past week a great rabbi out of Israel, Reb Shalom Arosh, Tzaddik, someone who wrote a book that I think many of you might have came across over the years. A very famous book. It was written maybe to date over 17 languages all over the world. If you wanted to talk about a Jewish bestseller, by far, The Garden of Emunah was one of the most popular written and read books over the last 2 decades, without a question. And the author, this great rabbi, Reb Shalom Arosh, he gets up and he does something so outlandish. He stands in public, videos himself live in front of an entire Israel tzibur, and he says something that takes such shoulders, and he announces to the entire Israeli tzibur that in his opinion, and I must say what he said, he turned to the interviewer and said, "You know me now for over 40 years. You've been listening to my classes for over 40 years," said the rabbi. "Did I ever once talk about the coming of Mashiach?" And the interviewer said, "No, Rabbi." Reb Shalom Arosh looks at the man and then looks at the tzibur in the face. And he says, "This is not like me. But I want everyone to know that in my simple opinion, I do believe that this coming Rosh Hashanah will be the last Rosh Hashanah without Mashiach. He may come by Rosh Hashanah," he said, "but if not then definitely this is the last Rosh Hashanah without Mashiach Tzidkenu." Do you know the responsibility a rabbi just took to say a thing like that in public? Do you know how careful you have to be when you talk in public? Do you know how many times rabbis were called out on things they said in public? But yet he took this incredible achrayut because he felt it was important for people to hear that there's very little time and there's a lot to do. I want to open tonight with the a lot to do. Because it always, I was thinking to myself, somebody came to me and said, "Rabbi, I always thought Mashiach's supposed to be coming on Pesach, not on Rosh Hashanah. Is there a connection between the coming of Mashiach to the Jewish people and the great day of Yom Hadin Rosh Hashanah?" Maybe we can touch upon that tonight. But before, let's take a step back. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember last year Rosh Hashanah? Do you remember standing in shul, listening to the shofar, and listening to the magnificent voice of the Hazan through the high holiday prayers? Could you imagine if somebody would have walked into shul and stopped the shofar from blowing last year Rosh Hashanah and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an important announcement to make. This coming year, the world's going to be hit with the greatest pandemic in history. This coming year, Corona was coming." People look at each other. Corona? I thought Corona was a bear. What's Corona? And then the guy would stand up and say, wait, guys, wait 1 second, I'm not done yet. And not just that, not just Corona is coming this coming year, but after that, just when you thought the coast was clear and you can come out of your houses, don't worry, there are going to be new curfews. There are going to be riots. Midtown Manhattan is going to look like a homeless shelter. Wait, other stuff is coming. And they start telling us one thing after the next, and we say, oh my gosh. If we would have known last year Rosh Hashanah, what was being decided for the coming year, boy, would we have used that Rosh Hashanah different. Boy, we had no idea. But now, we do know what happened this past year. And now we also know how incredibly important the coming year is going to play in the history of the Jewish people and the entire world. And we also know that the day that's going to decide it all is only 2 weeks away. How do you prepare for that day? Because preparing for that day is preparing for 365 days. Because it's that day that's going to dictate the entire coming, incredible, fickle, cautious, amazing year that's coming at us. And God gave us this gift called the Month of Elul. And He told us, use it wisely, because these are the days to prepare for the great day that will decide it all. Now, when I say all, I mean all. I mean, is Corona going to have a second spike? I mean, there's an incredible election coming up that's going to decide more than just the democracy of America, more than just if America will be great again. It's going to decide so much about Israel, the Jewish people, the quality of life in a land that we live. And it's going to be decided in 2 weeks. And we have now 2 weeks to prepare for that incredible day that's going to decide it all. Are you ready? Let's get ready. Tonight it's about getting ready. Tonight it's about preparing. Ki tetze la milchama al oivecha. Says Or HaChaim HaKadosh, when you go out to war on your enemy. Wait 1 second. Says Or HaChaim, this isn't talking about a biblical story. This is a parable that talks to every single Jew's life. Ki tetze. When you go out, where are we going out from? Says Or HaChaim, Ki tetze. Listen to these words. B'yitziato me'olam ha'elyon. When your soul leaves heaven and comes down to this world, lavo le'olam hazeh, enters the world to be born, yehem muchan lemilchama. The moment you're born, prepare yourself for the battle. Life is about challenges. Life is about an incredible strew of battles, challenges. Some we win, some we lose, but mostly we grow. Get ready for that incredible battle. Al oivecha, on the enemy. The enemy, we all know, is that Yetzer Hara. And boy, is he devious. And boy, do we have to be prepared for him. I remember, as a young boy, my Rebbe told me something that made me feel a lot better. There was one time we were in camp and we went up mountain climbing. And when we got to the top crevice of the mountain, I looked off the side, which isn't something you should do. Don't try this at home. And after I looked off the side, I heard this voice. There was a voice inside of me that said, jump. I thought I lost my mind. But then, years later, I had a rabbi, and my rabbi told me in the name of the great Rabbi Victor Miller, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, that the Yetzer Hara is a voice inside that at any turn he tries to bring you to your demise. And my Rebbe used an example. He says if you're on top of a high building and you look down, you might hear a voice, says Rabbi Miller, that will say jump. I said, whoo, I thought it was just me. No, that is the Yetzer Hara. And he's so devious because he disguises himself in your voice. The voice that I trust is my own. He sounds like me. He thinks like me. He sounds genuine. He sounds like our best friend. And then he tells us the most wicked things. And that is the war on this great and very devious enemy who camouflages himself under our voice and tries to, at any point, bring to our demise. Says the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, Ki tetzeh lamilchama al oivecha. When you leave heaven and come down to this world, the moment you're born, prepare for war. And in that war, what will you see? V'shavita shivyo. And you will see amongst the captives a beautiful woman. V'chashakta ba. And you'll want to take her for a wife. Says Or HaChaim HaKadosh, this na'ara is referring to your soul. Sometimes through that war, we are captured by certain Yetzer Hara. Says the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, says the Torah, take your life back. You're fighting the war, and sometimes we win, but sometimes we need to bring our neshama back and pull it away. And then what do? Says the Torah, Vehesirat simlat shivya me'aleha. Take off of that soul the clothing of captivity. Sometimes, because of our sins, our neshama becomes very dirtied. And it has bigadim of all types of captivity, all types of sin, and all types of addiction. Clean up the neshama. Bring it back home. And what to do? V'yashiva bebetecha. Bring it to the house. Says Or Chaim. Which house? Bebetecha, the Bet Knesset, and the Bet Midrash. And then what do? Ubachta et avia ve'et ima. And then cry over the father and the mother. Cry over Avinu Shebashamayim. Cry over the fact that we rebelled against Abba, Avinu Shebashamayim, and Knesset Yisrael, Avia ve'et ima. How long? Yerach Yamim. For 30 days. These are the days of Elul. Use these days and use this mashal, because the mashal of Yifat To'ar is really the parable of our neshama. We're out there lifetime fighting the war to stay as a pure, upright religious Jew. But there are times we have to step up and we have to take our life back. And we have to pull away from those addictions that we fight. And we have to pull away from those sins that we fell in and we know we're better than. And at that moment, we bring ourselves out of there and back to the shul, and back to the community, and back to our loved ones, and back to our yeshiva. And we clean ourselves up. And now, ubachta, we cry teshuvah, alavia, on our Father in heaven, that we rebelled. Yerach Yamim, here are the days of Elul. These are the days of incredible teshuvah. What an amazing mashal from the words of Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Now it's very powerful, because the word in the pasuk that was used here for teshuvah, according to Or HaChaim, is ubachta et aviha ve'et ima. You are to cry over your father and mother that we rebelled against. But it's interesting. Is crying really part of the teshuvah process? You see, when you look inside Maimonides, the Rambam gives you the recipe for teshuvah, and he puts it out in 4 steps. And in those 4 steps, he says, number 1, azivat hachet, you have to no longer do the sin anymore. Charata, feel bad about what you've done. Vidui, confess that you did what you did. And then finally, Kabbalah la'atid, take upon yourself from that day on, never ever to do it again in the future. That's the recipe for teshuvah. And if that's the case, where does the crying process come in? I heard from the Rosh HaYeshiva of Lakewood, my Rabbi Rucham Olshan Shalita, in his book, Yerach Lemoadim. He says something very interesting. And here's the eye-opener that we're going to base our words tonight. There are 2 types of teshuvah. There is the halachic teshuvah and the literal teshuvah. The halachic teshuvah is what we just described. That's the 4 steps that the Rambam taught us, that you have to feel bad, you have to make sure you never do it again, you have to say out to confess what you did. That is halachic teshuvah. That's what we do in Aseret Emet teshuvah. But there's another type of teshuvah that's exclusive to Elul. And this teshuvah is an Elul opportunity. That teshuvah is literal. Teshuvah. Tashuv. Tashuv means to return. Go back. Come back home. Come back to the source of all good and all perfection. Sit and make a cheshbon and realize sometimes how far we fell from Borei Olam. How far away are we and where we really should be in life. And sometimes not only to think about how far away we fell from God, but how far away did I fall from me, from my potential, from my calling, from who I was supposed to be. I used to pray, and I used to feel that prayer, and these days, for some reason, I just skim through it. I got to get back to the feeling of the prayers again. I used to be so careful in what I ate and the places and the restaurants that I ate in. And then for some reason lately, the last few months or over the last year, I started to slip, started to go back to places I know I shouldn't be eating in. I got to get back on track. I got to get back on track. I got to get back to who I know I really am. He describes this teshuvah as the realization that I need to return because I fell so far away from God and who I am supposed to be. This is lashuv, milashon teshuvah. Go back to who you really are supposed to be. We don't know how powerful our minds are. The mind, the human mind, is so incredibly powerful. But then we have a life's challenge to figure out who's in control of the mind. Is the mind in control of us, or are we in control of our minds? And this is a powerful idea. There was a great rabbi by the name of the Netziv. Now the Netziv is sitting at a table, and surrounding him are so many students. And you wouldn't believe the celebration he was celebrating. He was celebrating the completion, the siyum, of finishing Shas for the 1,000th time. I want you to digest that word for a minute. For the 1,000th time. The great Netziv. And at that incredible celebration, he turns to the students on the table and he tells them, he says to them, my students, I want you to hear the following story. He says, when I was only 8 years old, at home, I quickly came home. I went into my room. I closed the door. Because I knew when my father comes home, I'm in trouble. Why? Because the Rebbe In those days, it wasn't a yeshiva, it was a melamed, but the Rebbe threw him out from the group of Torah learning because he was making all different types of jokes. He knows that if his father finds out, he's finished. So quickly he went home. He went into his bedroom, closed the door, locked the door. An hour later, his father comes home. And his mother says to the father, and he hears, listening, has his ear up against the door. He hears his mother say to the father, your son was just thrown out from the Melamed's Torah class. He's not letting him back. He said, what? Again? That's it. I have no money. I'm literally giving every penny I have just so that my son could learn Torah. I put the money to the Melamed before the heat in the house. And my son isn't taking it seriously. And he's still making jokes. That's it. He no longer has the opportunity to learn again. I'm going to tell him that from now on, he's coming with me to my work. He's going to be a shoemaker, just like me, his dad. He says, just then, the Nitziv says, when he heard those words, he says he doesn't know what gripped him. He swung the door open as a little boy, 7, 8 years old, and he runs out and he grabs his father's leg and he begins to plead and he says, Daddy, no, please, I'm begging you. Give me one more chance. I really do want to learn Torah. I want to become somebody great in Klal Yisrael. I really want another chance. Please, I'm begging you. And my father saw that I was genuine. So he said, okay, I'm giving you this last chance. But after this, that's it. You're coming with me to the store and you're going to start making shoes. Says the Nitziv. He says, could you imagine if I would have stayed in that room, if I would not have ran out, begged my father another chance? The next day, I would have went to the shoe store and I would start making shoes for the next 100 years. And after 120 years, says the Nitziv, I'd come up to heaven and I'd stand in front of Bedin Shalmala, and in front of the Bedin, they would turn to me and say, Mr. So-and-so, what did you do with your life? And I would pick up an honest pair of shoes, which, don't get me wrong, is a very special thing. I'd pick up an honest pair of shoes and I would put it on the table of the rabbis of the Bedin. And the rabbis would take the shoes off the table, and then from under their table, they would put on the table the Ha'amek Davar, the Sefer that I was supposed to write on the Torah. And then they would have taken another book called the Nitziv that was written on the entire Shas, and then another book, and another book. And they would look at me and say, you made a pair of shoes? Where's the Nitziv? Where's the Hamek Davar? Where's the guy that was supposed to finish the Shas over 1,000 times and be a great giant in Israel? Where am I holding in life? And where should I be? This is the incredible teshuvah of Elul. And that teshuvah is something so powerful that it can bring a person to tears. That is the teshuvah. That when I realize sometimes how far I fell from Abba, from Avinu Shabashamayim, that can bring a person to tears. I went to Israel for many years and I learned in yeshiva there. 4 years as a Bachor and then another 3 years as Kolel. Every single time my mother drove me to JFK Airport, from the first time to the 31st time, she cried her eyes out, no different. Because when loved ones are separated and there's distance between them, the human reaction is to cry. In the month of Elul, we take stock and realize over the years, how far over this year did I sway, and how can I come back from where I know I should be for the coming year? And I want to tell you something very powerful. This is the time that you're given a special power to recreate and to become the person you always wanted to be. And I'm going to prove this to you with something fantastic. But first, I need to tell you an amazing story. The Baal Shem Tov, he was making his way through the countryside. The Shamosh, he was riding the wagon, and he pulled into a small town. And as they pulled into the small town, they saw thousands of people in the town square standing with their pitchforks, yelling and cheering and screaming. And in front, there was the priest standing on the stage, giving a fiery sermon. The Baal Shem Tov, he turns to his Shamosh and smiles. The Shamosh wasn't smiling. When the Shamosh saw the crowd fired up, screaming and yelling, he was scared as a Jew to step down off the carriage. They made their way to the inn, and the Baal Shem Tov took the top floor. The Baal Shem Tov looks down from the top floor of the inn, and he sees thousands of people. And he sees the priest giving a fiery sermon. The Baal Shem Tov turns to his Shamosh and says, "Do you see that priest? Go and tell him that the Baal Shem Tov is here in town. I want to speak to him right now." The Shamosh says, "Harav, you don't mean that I should go outside and walk through that riled up crowd of angry people holding pitchforks, do you?" The Baal Shem Tov tells them, "Go." And the Baal Shem Tov says, "Go." You go. So he went outside and made his way through the crowd, and he made his way and he jumped onto the stage, and everyone's looking at this Jewish guy with a beard and a kippah on his head, and he walks up to the priest and he whispers into the priest's ear, "The Baal Shem Tov is in town. He wants to talk to you." The priest's eyes open wide and his jaw drops, and he turns to Shamosh and says, "He's really here in this town?" He said, "Yes, the Baal Shem Tov is here." "Okay, tell him when I'll finish the sermon, I'll come to the inn." The Shamosh runs back. He comes to the Baal Shem. He says he's coming right after he finishes the speech. The Baal Shem Tov says, "You go back and you tell him to come right now." The Shamosh says, "Rebbe, they're going to rip me apart." "Go!" The Shamosh makes his way again through the crowd. Again, they see this little rabbi with a little white beard and a kippah, jumps on the stage, whispers something into the ear of the priest. And he says to him, the Baal Shem Tov said, "You got to come now." The priest says, "Now?" "Now." The priest, mid-sentence, stops the sermon, jumps off the stage, and comes back with the Shamosh. And the whole crowd watches. Where's the priest going? He goes into the inn, comes to the top floor, and he goes behind closed doors with the Baal Shem Tov. And all night, the priest doesn't come out. The next morning, the Baal Shem Tov comes down, and the priest is gone. And from that day on, no one ever heard or saw the priest again. The Shamosh said to the Baal Shem, "What happened to the priest?" "He's gone." Years later, the Baal Shem Tov was on his deathbed, and he was about to pass away. And the Shamosh turns to the Rebbe and says, "The great Baal Shem, give me a blessing for my future, my parnassah." The Baal Shem Tov says, "Your parnassah, after I pass away, you're going to travel the world and tell my stories." And with those words, that evening, the Baal Shem Tov passes away. The Shamosh starts traveling town to town, telling the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And he hears about a Jew on the other side of the world that pays a gold coin for every Baal Shem Tov story you tell. The Shamosh says, "A gold coin? I'm rich. I know thousands of stories. This is my forte. This is my life. This guy better have his gold coins ready." He jumps on a ship with his last pennies, and he makes his way to the other side of the world. And he comes into this little Jewish town. And it was Friday afternoon, and he asks the people, "Where's the rich man, the one that gives gold coins for Baal Shem Tov stories?" And they pointed him to a magnificent mansion, and he bangs on the door. And the butler comes to the door. Who are you? Who am I? Ha! I'm the Shamosh of the Baal Shem Tov. Your master better have his gold coins ready. When the master behind the room heard that the Shamosh of the Baal Shem Tov was by his door, he himself came running down the steps. Quickly, bring him inside. The master grabbed his suitcases, brought him to the most magnificent room, and he told him, I'm so happy you came. For every story you tell over this Shabbat, I will pay you a gold coin, unlimited. Tonight, I'm to invite the entire town, and you're to get up and tell all the Baal Shem Tov stories. We'll be with you all night. That night, after a magnificent Seudah, the town comes in for dessert. And now the Shamosh stands up with a big smile, and he already is about to cash in. And he opens his mouth to tell the first story. And suddenly, he goes blank. And everyone's looking at him, and he's looking at the crowd. And the Baal Habayit says, Chavod, go ahead. My mind went blank. They said, what? What is this guy, for real? Ah, come on, he's not the Shamosh of the Baal Shem. He can't remember one story? I'm sorry. The Baal Habayit says, people, relax. He had a long way. Let him sleep tonight. Tomorrow, we'll hear the stories of the Baal Shem. He slept that night, and in the middle of the night, remember it's Shabbat, he can't write. So in the middle of the night, he's making himself simanim, and he has 1 and 2 and 5 and 20 and 50 stories. All night he's memorizing his stories. And then the next morning, after shul, lunch comes, and then the town is here again for dessert. The Shamosh stands up, and this time he already has the simanim in his head. And he's starting with the first siman, and his mind goes blank. And the people were huffing and puffing. It happened again on Seudat Shalishit. And even Melava Malka, although all afternoon he had the stories on his fingertips, when it came the moment to give it over, his mind went blank. The next morning he's leaving, and he turns to the Baal Habayit and he says, I'm so sorry. I know you think I'm a liar, but I really am the Shamosh of Baal Shem. But I know you'll never believe me, and I don't blame you. I don't blame you. But it's funny, as I'm walking out your door, I just remembered one story. He said, yeah. Could you at least tell me that story? Please, I have a gold coin. He says, I'll tell you. Me and the Baal Shem, we were going through the countryside. And the carriage of the Baal Shem had its own mind and its own way of going places. I only sat there to make it look like that there was a driver, but the horses already had its way, al Piruach HaKodesh. And suddenly the horses turn into a town. And we come in and we see thousands of people with pitchforks yelling and screaming. And on a stage there stood the priest. And he was giving a fiery sermon. The Baal Shem Tov went into the inn. He took the top floor. He looked down at the crowd. He told me, go tell the priest that the Baal Shem Tov is here in town. I thought he was going to kill me, but I went out anyways. I jumped onto the stage. I whispered in the priest's ear, the Baal Shem Tov is here to see you. I couldn't believe it. The priest knew who the Baal Shem Tov was. And he said to me, he's here in this town? I said, yeah. He says, tell him I'll be there in a minute. I went to the Baal Shem. The Baal Shem sends me back again and tells him, come now. And the priest, in the middle of the speech, jumps off the stage and literally makes his way back. And he comes up to the top floor of the inn, and he goes behind closed doors with the Baal Shem Tov, and he disappears. And from that day on, no one had any idea whatever happened with this priest. What a crazy story. And the Baal Habayit starts crying. And he looks at the Shamosh and says, you want to hear the end of that story? That priest was me. Shamosh says, what? That's right. And the minute you came to my house, I knew that you're the Shamosh of the Baal Shem. And that's why I brought you in. I'm going to tell you what happened that night. You see, the night before I had a dream. I was a young boy, only 7, 8 years old. I was kidnapped by the Tsar's army. I was brought into the army and my Judaism was wiped away as a young boy. They refused to allow me to practice and they literally brainwashed me. I was very intelligent. I went up in the ranks quickly. And after the war, they put me in the monastery. Very quickly, I went up to the levels where I became priest. And at that point, my life was on a high till the night before your story. I had a dream. And this rabbi came in my dream and said to me, Yasala, you're a Yid. You're a Jew. You're not a priest. You're not a goy. You're a holy Jew. It's time to take your soul back. It's time to take your life back. We got to put you back to who you're really supposed to be. Tomorrow, I'm going to come to your town. Tomorrow, if someone tells you the Baal Shem Tov is in town, you'll know I'm here. And with those words, I woke up. I said, it's a dream. It's a dream. But then the next night, I see this Jewish guy running between the crowds in the middle of my sermon, jumps on the stage, and he whispers in my ear, the Baal Shem Tov is here. That was you. That was you. So I jumped off the stage. I went to the Baal Shem. And I sat with him behind closed doors all night. And all night we did teshuvah. And in the morning, the Baal Shem Tov told me, Yasala, run. Go to the other side of the world. No one will find you. By that time, they won't even know you're gone. You'll be very matzliach. And I said to him, Rebbe, how do I know that Shamayim accepted my teshuvah? How do I know I finally made it back to who I'm really supposed to be under these garments that don't belong to me? And he said to me, the sign that heaven will give you is the day that someone comes and tells you your story. That's the day you'll know that Shamayim accepted your teshuvah. And from that day on, I went to the other side of the world. I started life again as a religious Jew. I became very wealthy, and I offered a gold coin for anyone to tell me the stories of Baal Shem Tov, hoping to draw somebody to my side of the world to finally tell me my story. To finally tell me my story. To tell me that they accepted my teshuvah. And I was waiting for years for you to come. And finally, when you showed up at my doorstep, I couldn't say anything, but I recognized you right away. And that's why that night I put you up to speak. And I said to myself, this is it. But then when you opened your mouth and you went blank, I said, there's a Shamayim saying, you still need more teshuvah. So that whole Friday night, I did teshuvah. And then the next day I hoped, by lunch, you'd get up and say something, my story. But then again, you went blank. And Seudat Shalishit. And then Malav Amalka. I said, that's it. Shamayim is showing me I had the chance. But my teshuvah wasn't enough. Until now. You just told me my story. Finally, Shamayim. They gave me the teshuvah. But more than anything, the recognition that I became who I'm supposed to be. We fight this war. And sometimes we're captives of all types of clothing, habits, and addictions that don't belong on a holy Jewish soul. It's time to take that soul back. It's time to take the Bigdei Shivya off and to clean up the neshama and to go back, lashuv, to who we know we should be, who we could be, who we really are. That is such a sweet teshuvah, to be able to find purpose and fulfillment in who our calling in life for ourselves and for the Jewish people, so that when we come upstairs, we're not handing them a pair of shoes and they're to turn back and say, where's the Sefer Torah you were supposed to write? Where's the organization that was going to save Almanot and Yitomim that you are going to open? Where are those beautiful candies that you used to give to the kids in shul to make them happy, to come and later on even to pray? It's time to remember our role and to go back and play it. That's Elul. Ani lidodi v'dodi li. I want to come back to Hashem, and I want to come back to me. So that this year, when God recreates me on Rosh Hashanah, He's going to create the man I'm supposed to be, and not the man who fell short the past 12 months. And I can prove this to you. I can prove it to you in a ridiculous way. In the way of the Torat Abraham, the man from Slobodka, who says something that's riveting. He says that the Jewish holidays are not commemorations. We don't commemorate what happened in the past. We relive again, year after year, on that same day, what happened years ago. Because every year on that day, the same burst of energy comes into the world on that day, year after year. Meaning, when God created the world, there was a day on the calendar from the beginning of creation that was set aside for freedom. And every year on that same day, a burst of freedom comes into the world. We didn't know what day that was until the story of Pesach came along. But now that Passover happened, it revealed to us which day from the beginning of creation was the day that every single year on that day, a burst of freedom comes back into the world again. Rosh Hashanah is not the day God created the world. God created the world, Chaf Elul. Rosh Hashanah is the day that God created man. Rosh Hashanah is the day that a burst of life came into the world and gave man life. We live and we relive on this day. And every year on this same day, life comes back into the world, into mankind, and that's why it's the day of judgment, of life and death from every single man. This day that's coming now is the day that God created the first man, and the day that God recreates every single man for another year. Guys, can I tell you a secret? Do you know what the Midrash says? Before creation, the period right before creation, God used that period to be mechashben, cheshbonot, to figure how to make the best possible creation of man, so that when He creates him, he'll be justified for the world to be created for him. Do you know what that means? That means that just like Rosh Hashanah every year, a burst of energy comes in to create man. The days before Rosh Hashanah, a burst of energy comes into the world to plan, to bring out the best in the creation of who man will be. You know what those days are before Rosh Hashanah? Elul. And that's why, from the beginning of creation, just like the first man, the days before were used by God to think and work out and figure how to make the best possible man to create for that coming year. Elul was earmarked as the days that every year a burst of Siyata Dishmaya comes into the world for me and you and helps us dream. Dream big. Think big. Reach for the stars. This is the time that God gives us the magic wand of creation. And He tells us, in these days, recreate yourself to be the man you always wanted to be. So that when the day of creation comes back again this year, on Rosh Hashanah, we, Naaseh, Adam, me and you together will recreate you, the man you always wanted to be. That's the gift of Elul. It's an opportunity of 30 days to borrow the creation wand of God and start to plan like he did to recreate the best possible me, so that when Rosh Hashanah comes, we can recreate ourselves as the best of what we know we should be, and not the guy that was lacking the last 12 months of life. This is so powerful. This is a time that we go back to the source of perfection. We go back to Hashem on these days. We up our game. I remember the days where I used to be the first guy in Minyan. And then I started slipping. And now I get there by Baruch Hu. But that wasn't me, Rabbi. I used to be the guy that used to say korbanot in shul. I was the guy that used to turn the lights on. I was the guy that made coffee for the other people. We walked in, it was piping hot. And they looked at me and they said, Yavdu Chamim, Yavdu Chamim, Yavdu Chamim. I started my day with blessings. I started my day with energy. I don't know what happened. I started slipping. Not me anymore. I used to pray with fire. Now I just get through it. I used to do chesed for people. Rabbi, no one used to know the chesed I used to do. And now, and Rabbi, if you would have seen Shabbat in my home, the singing and how beautiful it was, oh, you would have been impressed. But now the kids moved away. And Shabbat in my home, for me and my wife, is not as what it used to be. And now it's like, we get through it. I want to bring Shabbat back into my home. I want to bring me back up to par. These days are the days that we bridge the gap between the person we are and the person we're supposed to be. And that's the guy that's going to be recreated on the day of creation, Rosh Hashanah, for the next 12 months. Rabotai. That's something we can cry about. Ubachta et avia ve'et ima yerach yamim. The 30 days of Elul. I know I took up my time. I know that officially this class should be over. But I'm begging you, please just give me a few more minutes to just unleash one beautiful pearl that I brought with me tonight, just for the Aventura audience. Every time I go out there to you guys, you're the warmest people in the world. Not just the weather, the people. And I love the atmosphere. And the rabbi sets the atmosphere. That's all we need to say. But the people that I meet, both the New Yorkers and those coming from different Spanish descents, but the warmth is beyond words. And we can learn from you guys. Because if the achdut of warmth was in Klal Yisrael, the way I remembered it in Aventura, long ago, this speech would have been about the day that Mashiach came, not the day that he will come. And therefore I beg you, let me just give you just one insight, because I think after we heard the important words of this incredible, unique approach to Teshuvah in Elul, as opposed to what we typically know as the Teshuvah of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, I think we need chizuk. We went through Corona. We went through riots. We went through losses. We lost good people. Abruptly. We went through impeachment processes that were beyond words. And we went through a world pandemic that history has never told before. 7.7 billion people shut down, not having a clue what hit them. A year like that, we need chizuk. A year like that, we need Mashiach. Like Rav Shalom Arosh, I think there is a connection between Rosh Hashanah and the great coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. I hope he comes tomorrow. Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah. I'll take him anytime. Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret. If he would show up in the middle of Simchat Torah, oh, the dance we would dance with him. Oh. We dance with him and we cry and what took so long? Please, let me just share with you one last idea. Two charutot in the great Lakewood Yeshiva, sitting and learning the Gemara about a miraculous river known as the Sambatyon River. This Sambatyon River was something fantastic. It shot up its boulders and stones 6 days a week. And on the seventh day, the river would rest. This river testified to God's creation and Shabbat Kodesh. The Sambatyon River was legendary, and many good historians were constantly on search for the famous expeditions if they can find the miraculous Sambatyon River. These two guys, learning in the library of Lakewood Yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey, learning about the Gemara of this miraculous river, they asked themselves, are there any Svarim that talk about this? They couldn't believe their eyes. They went to the computer, they put in the Sambatyon River, and they found a sefer that was written by the great-grandfather of none other than Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzadik Libracha. The name of the sefer is Kol Mivaser. And this rabbi, he was a great tzaddik mikubal, he was an Auerbach, spent his life looking for the Sambatyon River. Now, this rabbi wasn't a historian. He wasn't into expeditions. This wasn't one of those Steven Spielberg stories. He wasn't looking for Dr. Jones, you know what I mean? He was looking for the Sambatyon River for a different reason. Because he knew, as he wrote in his book, that behind the Sambatyon River is the gem and jewel of the Jewish people. Behind the Sambatyon was where the lost tribes of Israel was hiding. And these people were great tzaddikim. And they lived al pi bat kol. And after destruction of Bet HaMikdash, they disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to them. But legend has it that behind the Sambatyon, because you can't cross it, they are protected and they are guarded. And these great people, the lost tribes of Israel, that's right, you might not know this. Today, all the Jews that we know are primarily from 3 tribes. They're primarily from Yehuda, Binyamin, Levi. That's it. Where's everybody else? Reuven, Shimon, Gad, where's everybody else? Those are the lost tribes of Israel, guarded behind the Sambatyon River. They opened up the Sefer, and they started to read that this rabbi's life's work was in quest to find this miraculous river, because once he finds the Sambatyon, he'll find the lost tribes of Israel behind it. And these great tzaddikim who live al pi bat kol, they live with an open voice from heaven. That's like the best Wi-Fi you can ever get. Those great rabbis will be able to pray for the Geulah in ways that maybe they don't know how much the rest of Israel is suffering. Galut for 2,000 years. Pray for us. So he went out to look, and he spent his life in search for this Sambatyon till finally he figured it out. And he found the exact coordinates, al pi Kabbalah, of where this Sambatyon is. And at the end of his life, he traveled to the other side of the world, and he writes that he went through deserts and mountains till finally he came to X marks the spot. Here are the coordinates for the great legendary Sambatyon River. And he turns his way past the last mountain, and he makes his way through the desert, and he comes up to the exact spot, the coordinates that he spent his life searching for. And there was nothing there. There was nothing there. And he said to himself, I spent my life. How was I wrong? This is supposed to be the spot. There's no river. He was heartbroken. He was a man in his late 70s. With a broken heart, he started making his way back through the desert, and there was a nomad. There was an Arab in a tent. And in those days, they used to barter. He needed something to drink. So he comes up to the nomad, and he tells him, I'll give you my gold watch for a bottle of water. The nomad says, you look like a man of God. Are you Jewish? He says, yes, I'm Jewish. He says, listen, I have in the back of my tent a treasure. Come to the back of my tent. A man of God like you will appreciate what I'm about to show you. You'll never see this again. He thought maybe the guy was just drawing him in. So the minute he turns his back, maybe who knows what it'll do to him. He was scared. But what choice he had? He's the guy with the water. One way or another, he's not going to make it without this guy. So he writes to Kol Mevaser. He went into the tent. He went to the back of the tent. And the Arab showed him, look inside that sack. And he sees a sack of dirt. He says, what's so special? He says, look closer. And all of a sudden he sees the dirt is popping, and jumping, and popping up and down. And he looks closer and he says, whoa. And then it hits him. The Sambatyon. He turns to the Arab and says, where did you get the sand from? He says, this sand is miraculous. It pops and jumps for 6 days. And on the 7th day it stops. It's with this sand that I know what day of the week it is, the Arab tells the rabbi. The rabbi says, where'd you get this from? I spent my whole life looking for this. He says, Rabbi, I'm going to tell you. You go past the mountain, across the desert, right at the head of the trees. That's where I got it from. He says, that's where I went. That's where I went. There was nothing there. And then it dawned on him. The Sambatyon River is no longer a river. The river dried out. But the sand remained. And it continues to shoot up 6 days. And on the 7th day, it rests. He says, now I see Shamayim wanted to show me that my life was not in vain. He writes in his Sefer, Kol Mevaser, I'm too old to go back. But anyone who wants to pick up my quest, he wrote in the Sefer the coordinates of where he believes, al pi Kabbalah, it was found, the great Sambatyon River, with the treasure behind it, the lost tribes of Israel. With this book, these two Avrechim in Lakewood, their jaws dropped, they hit the jackpot, and they decided, we're going after it. But where is this? What part of the world is this? So they made their way to the New York Library, you know, the big one in Manhattan that people sit on the steps and eat lunch before Corona, right? And they went to this library. And in the library, it's one of those magnificent libraries that they actually have a map room. They have maps of the entire world, old maps from biblical times. And there was one map that they found that was more in detail and precise and concise than any other map in the entire collection. And those were the Nazi maps, Yamashima, of World War II. The Nazis had mapped out every inch of the globe. They knew every single inch of who is where and what is what. Quickly, they took the Nazi maps and they took out the Sefer Kol Mevaser of the rabbi, and they took the coordinates and plugged it into the maps, and they started to look through and follow until X marks the spot. They saw on the Nazi maps the coordinates came out to Tibet, China. Aye, China, you thought it was only Corona, huh? Tibet, China. But then they couldn't believe their eyes. Because in German, the Nazis wrote, right behind the line, there was trees. The Nazis wrote in German, B'nai Moshe. B'nai Moshe. What did the Nazis know about the B'nai Moshe? Who are the B'nai Moshe? The Gemara tells us that the B'nai Moshe was supermen. They were like Moshe Rabbeinu. They were beyond. The B'nai Moshe, well, the Nazis knew they were there. And if anybody knows that famous story with Ed Koch, when all the governors, the mayors of the world took that incredible world expedition, world tour to all different European countries. They took the mayors to Germany and they brought them into the office of Hitler, Yamashima. And right there on the desk was the globe of Hitler, still intact, nothing was touched since World War II. And as the tour guide was talking, Ed Koch, a Jew, was fingering through the globe. And then he looks a little closer, and he sees that on the globe, there was handwritten numbers on each country. So quickly, Ed Koch turns to the tour guide and says, what are these handwritten numbers on all the countries on the globe? And the tour guide tried to change the conversation, till finally he says, no, tell me, what's these numbers? And he says, well, Mr. Koch, as a Jew, I don't know if you want to hear. He says, no, I want to hear. He says, Hitler, Yamashima, wrote on every single country in his own handwriting the exact number of Jews in every single country. He knew every single one to the last Jew. And in Transylvania, Ed Koch turned the globe and he saw Transylvania 1. That means the one Jew in Transylvania, Hitler knew about him and he wanted him. So they knew about the B'nai Moshe. These were miraculous Jews. I can tell you stories from today till tomorrow, B'nai Moshe. But the Nazis knew the secret of the Sanchos River and, of course, the B'nai Moshe of Israel. They even knew where the lost tribes were, and they wanted them too. Ve'alu Mosheim b'Har Tzion lishpot et Har Esav, says the Talmidei Hagirah, the Vilna Gaon. Who are these Mosheim? Who are these Mosheim? Says the Vilna Gaon. Elu B'nai Moshe. That when Mashiach comes, they're going to come out of the mountains. Lishpot et Har Esav. When they found this, they couldn't believe their eyes. These two guys, they took copies of the Nazi maps. They came running back to the Bet Midrash of Lakewood, and they came to Reb Natan Wachvogel, Zechet Tzadik Lebracha, the great mashkiach at that time of the Lakewood Yeshiva, and they said, Reb Nosson, we found the treasure. We found the lost tribes of Israel. We found the Sambatyon. Look at the Nazi maps. Reb Nosson looked at the maps. He couldn't believe his eyes. Reb Nosson Wachvogel was the guy that when people would drive him from Lakewood to Brooklyn for a wedding, he would tell the driver, turn on the radio in case Mashiach comes while we're en route. He says, we're going to bring Mashiach. They organized a group of 10 men from Lakewood. They bought them tickets to Tibet, China. They got the best tour guides in that area of Tibet. They brought 10-foot woofer speakers on a speaker system with a microphone. And they were instructed by the great Reb Natan Wachvogel, go to Tibet, stand at the edge of the Tibetan forest where the lost tribes are on the other side of the Sanchos River, the Sambatyon, and put up the speakers and get on the mic and announce, by the command of the great Reb Natan Wachvogel from Lakewood, New Jersey, you must come out, B'nai Moshe. You must come out, lost tribes. We need your tefillot. Klal Yisrael is in no good shape. We need help. We need your tefillot. We need a geulah. And they all agreed. And they got their visas, and they got the woofer, they got these tour guide, they got everything. And the night before the trip, they got a phone call from the Chinese embassy. Gentlemen, we feel terrible, but we need to cancel your trip because that area of Tibet was closed off for the government's nuclear testing to all outsiders. And the whole trip was canceled. And they came back to Rav Natan Vachvogel and he said, Min HaShamayim, it just wasn't time yet. But that was 30 years ago. Today we have Google. Today we have all different types of fancy ways to check information. And I'm sure you'll Google when they just opened the Tibet-Nepal border, 2019, because the doors are opening and we are ready to go. Rabotai, it's time. Here we are, 2 weeks before the day that is going to be Kovea, everything of the coming year. This is the time that we take our lives back. These are the time that we take the neshama back. This is the time that we take off all the begadim of the dirty sins and we clean it up and we go back to being not just who we are today, but who we know we could be and we should be. These are the days that there's a burst that comes into the world that helps us recreate ourselves so that now on the great day of creation, Rosh Hashanah, we'll be recreated as the new man, but the best that I could be for the coming year. Let's grab this opportunity, Lashuv, to go back and become the great people of Israel. Let's be ready for that great day when Mashiach comes. Let's prepare for a great year that will build this Bet HaMikdash, and Be'ezrat Hashem, Klal Yisrael will be zocheh to not corona, but the coronation of Borei Olam in Eretz Yisrael, B'bi'at HaGoel. Amen. Thank you for your beautiful invitation, and thank you for your beautiful rabbi, and thank you for your beautiful community. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we should be zochet together to smachot. Amen ken yiratzon. Thank you for your patience.
In the name of everybody present through Zoom and virtually through iTorah, אין לנו מילים. That is the comments that we all share together. We have no words to express our gratitude to your words of Untitled. You started with Rabbi Arush statement about Mashiach. So I'd like to let you know in the audience that Be'ezrat Hashem we have Rabbi Lazer Brody, which is the one who actually translated
That's right.
the Garden of Emunah and the Garden of Peace and many other books in English. The rabbi will be visiting us Be'ezrat Hashem virtually on Aseret Yemet Teshuvah, September the 23rd at 8:30 in the morning. I'll send you an invitation, Rabbi, because I know you love the way they speak and infusing everybody with Emunah. But tonight is about Rabbi Duvi ben Shushan. Rabbi, your invitation to Florida is an open ticket.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
there are no penalties. And there are we deal with all the hosting, with the transportation. It's just a matter of Be'ezrat Hashem when things will become better.
Amen.
If Haz v'Shalom Mashiach is not here between now and then, you owe us. Last time you were here was Shemitah.
Oh.
Okay, you have Semachot, you have Baruch Hashem, a lot of good things that happen through the years. But nevertheless, Chacham, I give you the blessing of everybody. Yelechu b'chai l'chai.
Amen. Amen.
Continue spreading the Hizuk, the good Hashpa'ah, the It'arelut, which is definitely required in this magnificent month of Elul. So, Be'ezrat Hashem, in the name of everybody, would like to wish you to have a ketivah, b'hatimah tovah
Amen.
to you and to your family, this whole Shanim Rabot, and for sunny Florida. Next Monday evening at 8:30, we're going to be welcoming Rabbi David Asher. Also through the Hakam, we only go a certain madrigal. We go to a certain rate. We were spoiled for many years being able to bring the speaker. So the Kahal already says, Rabbi Duvi was not here for 5 years.
Wow.
What is going on? You cannot bring him? I said, listen, Rabbi Duvi is mishpacha of mine, right? I'm like, Rabbi,
That's right.
tell the audience.
That's
That's
right.
you.
That's right. We're family before we were family, and then we're family even more so now.
There is a Galimiri in Rabbi Duvi's family.
Yep. My wife's grandmother.
Beautiful. Okay, Hakam, everybody, from all the comments that I'm getting, just feeding them to you. Powerful words. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
When are you coming back? How come I never heard of you before? You got Baruch Hashem, a whole potpourri of messages.
Thank you.
Be'ezat Hashem, Hakam, we wish you betov talino. Have a great night.
Amen. Amen.
Say hello to my son-in-law and my grandkids.
Absolutely.
Be'ezat Hashem, the Girana boys.
They're great.
I'm eagerly watching the class with us tonight, and Be'ezat Hashem, we should have, as you said in the beginning of the class, if this reminds me of the story of the great Kedushat Levi Yitzchak of Bardicho, that an invitation was presented to a wedding. Remember?
Yeah.
And the invitation said the wedding will be held in Bardicho. He crossed out and he said, the wedding will be held in Yerushalayim, Eir HaKodesh. And if for some reason Mashiach does not come by the day of the wedding, so then the Chuppah will take place in Bardicho. And we finish by expressing our gratitude to Yesod HaOlam, the beautiful institution that have one desire, Hakam, how to make the life of those hospital-bound on a Shabbat and
Wow.
Tov to be comfortable, to be bright, and to be enjoyable.
Ashrechem.
This is it. This is not a fundraising. This is just to create an awareness. They are ready. They are willing to help. They are eager to help.
Ashrechem.
That Hesed is definitely one of the foundations
For sure.
of the world. Okay, Hakam?
Thank you.
Have a great night. Betov Talino. Have a good night.
כתיבה וחתימה טובה.
Amen. תזכו לשנים רבות.
נעימות טובות.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, you can unmute yourself. Everybody's able to unmute.
Go ahead. You want to first do the...